With its unique art style, gameplay, and murderous teddy bears, it's no wonder that Danganronpa became a cult phenomenon. So right now, if you're not part of that cult, you're probably scratching your head and wondering what in tarnation a Danganronpa bongo dongo is. And don't worry, we're here to help. Hi, I'm Jacob with the Leaderboard, and today we're counting down 107 facts about Danganronpa. Grab your Sherlock Holmes cap, keep a lookout for suspicious teddy bears, and let the investigation begin. The franchise was created by acclaimed Japanese developer CHUNSOFT, known for creating other games like Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Gates to Infinity, and Zero Escape. The game's premise revolves around 15 of Japan's best students who are invited to attend the prestigious Tokyo-based Hope's Peak Academy. However, they end up passing out and waking up in a locked room, and then the chaos begins. What chaos is that, you may ask? Well, a robotic bear named Monokuma incentivizes the students to murder one another with the promise that anybody who can get away with their murder will be freed. The other students are ordered to investigate the crime, but if they're unable to solve it, they'll all be killed as well. The game was led and written by Kazutaka Kodaka, who is no stranger to detective stories, having written novels based on the Detective Saburo Jinguji series, also known as the Jake Hunter series, and even oversaw the scenario and trick component for the Nintendo DS title Detective Conan and Kindaichi Shonen. When Kodaka began developing Danganronpa, he settled upon three core concepts as a starting point. He wanted a 3D game, no action gameplay, and he wanted it to be something grotesque and cruel. A hell of a trifecta, but we'd say he was pretty successful. The game's story was deeply inspired by the Sega Dreamcast title Illbleed. Kodaka said that he chose the game as a jumping off point because he, quote, loved how crazy it was. The game also drew plenty of inspiration from popular films like Saw, Cube, and Battle Royale. Danganronpa is a genre of game known as the visual novel, which has been around since the 1980s. Highly popular throughout Japan, visual novels are comparable to Western choose-your-own-adventure style games, featuring elements like heavy narration and problem solving, and they don't typically feature many interactive elements or animation. According to a press release from CHUNSOFT, the name Danganronpa is meant to mean winning an argument about a bullet when translated into English. Kodaka was heavily influenced by his favorite mystery writer, novelist, and manga writer Nisio Isin, known for series like Zaregoto and Monogatari. He admires Isin's practice of taking the rules of mystery writing, throwing them out the window, and then taking the audience for a ride filled with twists and turns. Kodaka also finds it important to make his villains likable instead of making them two-dimensional bullies. In his own words, I would rather make a bad character who is bullied themselves. I want to make those bad guys lovable in some way. The team decided to blend two polar opposite genres, shooting and problem solving. One is so intellectual and the other is so mindless that it created a new experience no other developer had really previously attempted, and it was described by Kodaka as deliciously evil. The developers based the game's core elements around opposites, like hope versus despair, life versus death, and cruelty versus humor. They did this to make the player's emotions swing back and forth like the pendulum of a clock. Japanese artist Rui Komatsuzaki has served as the lead artist for all 5 games in the Danganronpa series, although he originally was trained to be a sculptor. Danganronpa was the first time in Komatsuzaki's career that he was tasked with designing characters from the ground up. He said that his inexperience actually helped the game differentiate itself from the artists that are all trained in the traditional anime art styles, giving Danganronpa a more distinct style that sets it apart from the rest. Komatsuzaki made an effort to make every character look unorthodox and strange, as though they didn't belong in your typical adventure title. He wanted to provide his own twists on age-old tropes like the hero and heroine, the fat kid, or the thin kid. The beta for the game was titled Distrust, and featured a much darker tone than the one found in the final game, with more realistic character designs and red blood to boot. Distrust had a complex mechanic not found in the final game called the Trust-Distrust system. With this mechanic, players would be able to gain the trust or hatred of other characters, allowing players to take alternative routes throughout the story. This would ultimately have led to the game possessing multiple endings. While the Trust-Distrust system may have gone unused in the Danganronpa series, it found life in another CHUNSOFT title, Zero Escape: Virtue's Last Reward. Another huge difference between Distrust and Danganronpa was the inclusion of a 7-day time limit, a mechanic that surely would have made the game much more brutal, challenging, and stressful. When the design designers decided to shift from the darker tone of distrust, they initially had difficulty establishing a tone that was both fun and disturbing. They didn't quite discover the tone they were looking for until they decided on the final design for Monokuma, who solidified the game's now iconic art style. Monokuma's design was partially inspired by 3D models of the human body that depict a completely human half on one side and the organs and bones on the other. While it took a long time to design most of the characters that appeared in the original game, it took Komatsuzaki a whopping 5 minutes to create Monokuma's final design. The colors used in Monokuma's design symbolize different aspects of the character. The black symbolizes his status as a sinister criminal, the white symbolizes his seemingly innocent look, and the red is symbolic of his bloodlust. In creating the villainous Monokuma, and in line with the general vision of the game, the developers wanted to create an antagonist that was both adorable and disturbing at the same time. Kodaka's favorite character to write was Monokuma because he's the one character that can say whatever he wants to say without any negative repercussions, since he's a villain without things like standards or morality or mortality. Monokuma was originally designed to resemble something of a humanoid-like figure, but the designers thought this was a little too disturbing and opted to take something cute, a teddy bear, and marry it with something creepy. One of the biggest influences behind Monokuma's final design was none other than the fan-favorite Spider-Man villain, Venom. In case you were wondering, Monokuma stands at a minuscule 2 feet 2 inches. That's only 65 centimeters for our non-American viewers. If you notice, the design of Monokuma's red evil eye is identical to the insignia found on the logo of Hope's Peak Academy where the game takes place. The more you know. Kodaka enjoys developing the characters above all else and puts a bit more effort into their development. He explained that the player needs to be attached to particular characters so that when something happens to them, good or bad, the emotional impact on the player is much greater, keeping them invested. They used kids as opposed to adults because Kodaka wanted to show the characters going through a stage of true growth, something that isn't quite as profound when tacked onto an adult character, whom Kodaka would consider to be already complete. He also stated that the death of a child is much more severe than that of an adult because they've just begun to live their life with, hopefully, much more to come. To make sure the game's ultimate characters were interesting enough, Kodaka would ask himself, could I write an entire story around this character? Could this character star in their own video game? The game's visuals were chosen to lessen the game's grotesque feel so that it wouldn't receive too high of a mature rating. This included making the blood pink and making the art style more akin to that of pop art. The designers refer to the game's distinct art style as psychopop. It's described as being somewhere between fun and flat-out disturbing, but that's what makes it so brilliant because it's both! Kodaka provided Komatsuzaki with written instructions on how the characters should look. However, Komatsuzaki oftentimes developed certain design cues on his own that impressed Kodaka and inspired him to rewrite certain aspects of a character that better reflected the artist's interpretation. Sayaka and Leon were the first characters designed, and their models were used as the basis for all of the other character designs in the game, so the designers had to constantly keep coming back to the duo and eventually got sick of them. This is why, spoilers everyone, they both die within the first chapter of the game. Wow, so you definitely don't want to overstay your welcome with these designers. Sakura's design was based on a series of sketches that Komatsuzaki made of warrior high school girls throughout his days in school. He had always wanted to slip one of these designs into a professional project, and then he did. The most difficult character for the staff to design was Sakura Ogami. Some thought that making her a girl would be clever and humorous, while others thought the angle was odd and alienating, and proposed that she just be a he. Another disagreement over Sakura came from some staffers thinking that if the character were to be female, that they should make her prettier, while some preferred the trope-defying final design. What are your thoughts? Respectfully discuss in the comments. Makoto was intentionally designed without too much of a specific personality to make him easier for any player to identify with. In Komatsuzaki's opinion, this made Makoto much more difficult to design in comparison to the other characters. Makoto was given a hoodie with a design on the back because the game was originally intended to be played from a third-person perspective during the adventure part of the game, and the designers wanted to give the player something nice to look at. To reflect his passive nature, Makoto was given herbivore features in his design, like his short stature and a hair antenna. While the executions of Sayaka, Kiyotaka, Yasuhiro, Byakuya, Chihiro, Toko, Aoi, Sakura, and Hifumi are never seen within the game, the characters did have planned executions that were going to be included, but they didn't make the final cut. They can be seen in the official Danganronpa art book. Gameplay elements like free exploration were added to the game because the visual novel genre just wasn't as popular with consumers anymore, so the team tried to reinvigorate interest in the genre by implementing as many interactive elements as possible in order to give it a broader, more mainstream appeal. Danganronpa uses a visual technique called 2.5D motion graphics, which blends 2D and 3D graphics together. While the school itself is a 3D environment able to be explored to the fullest, the characters and objects themselves are 2D models. The game's music was scored by composer Masafumi Takada. He's previously contributed his melodies to other gaming greats like No More Heroes, Super Smash Bros. Brawl, and The Evil Within. To compose game music, Takada will typically watch muted footage to get inspired, but for Danganronpa he took a very different approach. Danganronpa is a game that Takada is very invested in story-wise, and he chose not to spoil it for himself by not looking at any gameplay during the scoring phase. Instead, he created the music blindly so that, upon release, he could enjoy the twists and turns the same way the average player would. One of the tracks in Danganronpa's soundtrack is called Distrust, a nod to the game's original title before it received its psycho-pop revamp. The game's truth bullets were inspired by Nico Nico, a Japanese online video service similar to YouTube. It allows users to type comments that will fly across the screen as the video plays, which other viewers can then break. The developers thought that Nico Nico's commenting system was a great way of visualizing an intense debate. The development cycle of a Danganronpa game is pretty tight, with the team only being given 1 year to work on each title. Not all Ultimates, originally known as Supers that were thought up, actually made it into the final game. At one point, the designers intended to include the likes of a dog trainer, a musician, and even a robot. Another robot that isn't Monokuma. Kodaka said that the execution scenes were not only designed to shock the player, but also to make them wonder, did this character really deserve what came to them? Bringing a bit of sympathy toward the murderers. The idea for Monokuma Theater came from the need to create some space in between the scenes of the game. Kodaka said the sequences were challenging to write, and he feels that the ones created for the second game simply aren't up to par with the ones that appear in the first. Kodaka is a huge fan of film director Quentin Tarantino, a man known for hiding numerous pop culture references within his movies, which in turn inspired Kodaka to hide tons of pop culture goodness within the Danganronpa games. These references almost always go unchanged from Japanese to English. When deciding on the voice for Monokuma, somebody on staff initially joked about hiring acclaimed Japanese actress Nobuyo Oyama, known for playing the character Doraemon in the anime series of the same name. Though she appeared to be out of the production's reach, producer Yuichiro Saito was able to pull a few strings and miraculously got Oyama in the booth to play Monokuma. They were also lucky enough to cast iconic voice actor Megumi Ogata, who voiced Makoto Naegi, as well as Nagito Komaeda in later titles. They also cast Akira Ishida, who voiced Byakuya Togami, as well as the Ultimate Imposter throughout the rest of the franchise. Ishida played these same characters in the anime Danganronpa 3, The End of Hope's Peak High School Future Arc, and Danganronpa the Animation. Both Ogata and Ishida worked together on Neon Genesis Evangelion. On the to be continued screen that appears between each chapter, you can see silhouettes of each character, but what players may not realize is that these silhouettes come from the beta versions of each character. The original pictures can still be found within the game's files through data mining. Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc was originally released for the PlayStation Portable exclusively in Japan in 2010. In February of 2014, it was finally released in the United States and European territories for the PlayStation Vita. Danganronpa transcended video games with a manga adaptation. It was initially a web magazine published on Enterbrain's Famitsu comic Clear Magazine and lasted from 2010 until 2013. The manga story is told from the perspective of the other students encountered in the game. Danganronpa got the anime treatment in 2013 with a full series based around the events of the first game. The TV anime was produced by the Japanese animation studio Lerche and directed by Seiji Kishi, known for his work on Persona 4 the animation, and the original Japanese voice actors for Makoto Naegi, Monokuma, and Kyoko Kirigiri reprised their roles for the anime. The original game sold over 25,000 copies within its first week of release, making it the top-selling PlayStation Portable game of the week. It would later go on to sell over 85,000 copies after only 3 months on Japanese store shelves. The game went beyond Sony's platforms in August of 2012 when it was ported onto the Apple iOS, being jam-packed with new features like Retina display, touchscreen controls, and an exclusive image gallery. The website Something Awful can be credited with planting the seeds that would become the English-speaking fanbase of Danganronpa, with its highly popular Let's Play of the original game that was entirely translated into English for the audience by user Oren Ronan. This unconventional Let's Play consisted of screen caps and text written into posts on the forum. It got to a point where there was English-speaking hype for the sequel before the original was even released in English. Another thing that happened before the release to the English-speaking audience was that a group of fans created an unofficial patch for the Japanese PSP version called Project Zetsubo, which translated the entire game into English for the very first time. Danganronpa is the first US release by Spike Chunsoft to be rated M for mature. While there was concern that the American localization team would alter and censor content to make it less grotesque for the Western audience, the localization team decided to take a risk and leave the game exactly how it was in Japan, executions and all. When the game started gaining traction with English-speaking audiences, it also spawned a popular Tumblr meme in which users would ridicule the franchise's title with a swarm of humorous nicknames that sounded similar, like Hangman Ron Paul or Ding Dong Ronpus, just to name a couple. When it was released for the PlayStation Vita in 2014, Danganronpa received quite a bit of love from major gaming journalism outlets like Game Informer, which gave it not one, but 2 awards in its Best of 2014 awards. Danganronpa received Best Adventure and Best PlayStation Vita exclusive. In March of 2017, a remaster of the first 2 games, Danganronpa 1-2 Reload, was released for the PlayStation Vita, PC, and PlayStation 4, marking the first time the original games were made available on a home console. The port features remastered graphics and new modes consisting of School Mode and Island Mode. It was also sold through Steam and can run on Mac systems. In the PS Vita version of Trigger Happy Havoc, the trophies called Despair's Last Reward and 9 coins, 9 purses, 9 bears are nods to Zero Escape. The trophies are mimicking the Zero Escape subtitles, Virtue's Last Reward, and 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors. Producer Yoshinori Terasawa stated that while initially not that popular when the game was first released, Kiyotake Ishimagu gained a significant spike in popularity amongst the Japanese audience thanks to his portrayal in the Danganronpa anime. In an interview with Game Informer, Kodaka hinted that there's the possibility that throughout the events of the first game, Junko placed multiple Monokumas throughout the school and operated them from a central control room. Kodaka's favorite ultimates in the series are Genocide Jill and Ibuki Myoda because they're always super amped and energetic, making them very fun characters to write for. Komatsuzaki's favorite character in the game is Toko. He believes that her character represents the game's worldview, making her a better representation of the franchise as a whole than even Monokuma, in his humble opinion. Kodaka stated that if he were punished by Monokuma, the Demented Bear would probably sentence him to death by not creating a scenario on time, having him overwork himself, and then having him continuously write until he finally keels over. Spike Chunsoft came out with a mobile spin-off title set in the Danganronpa universe called Danganronpa Unlimited Battle. It was released on iOS and Android in 2015, and it was a free-to-play cooperative action game that lacked any real plot, instead focusing on taking down enemies. Despite accumulating over 700,000 user accounts, Unlimited Battle's lifespan was in fact quite limited, with Spike Chunsoft ending microtransactions in October of 2015 and the game itself shutting down a month later. Uzami Monomi was created based around the concept of having a cute girl stand over Monokuma until the team realized that nobody stands over Monokuma, so they instead decided to create a counter-mascot character, an anti-Monokuma who just happens to also be a masochist. Kodaka intentionally wrote scenarios for the second game that mirrored the first with the intention of tricking and trapping players of the first game that thought the outcome would be exactly the same. He's a tricky guy, that Kodaka. The design for Gundam Tanaka was based around the idea of creating a Chunibyo character, an immaturely minded person who lives in their own fantasy world and believes that they are the greatest person of all. Spoilers ahoy, Junko was not originally intended to return as the villain for the second game. Kodaka had long considered the second game's villain to be everything from a survivor of the first game to even the previous game's protagonist, Makoto. Kodaka eventually brought back Junko because he simply didn't think he could create a better villain than her. From that moment on, he became infatuated with the idea of bringing back a character that players were absolutely certain had perished, making for yet another great twist. Kodaka originally intended for the second game to be largely separate from the first game, not featuring any of the original cast members. It wasn't until he was halfway through writing the scenarios that he realized it would probably be nice to not leave players in the dark about their fates, so the latter half of the sequel was written to tie into the first game. The surfboarding minigame in Danganronpa 2 is actually an inside joke at the expense of the Japanese voice actor for Hajime, Minami Takayama, who also plays Detective Conan, a character known for his turbo skateboard. While many believe the minigame to be a reference to a similar minigame found in Final Fantasy VII, Kodaka has assured players that it's just a coincidence. After spending 2 games in the visual novel genre, Spike Chunsoft churned out a spin-off title, Danganronpa Another Episode Ultra Despair Girls, which unlike the other games in the series is a third-person action game with horror elements. The player assumes the role of Komaru Naegi, who tries to survive a city overrun by Monokuma robots. Komaru's signature weapon in Despair Girls is a megaphone-shaped hacking gun, which is capable of using various types of word bullets. The hacking gun can accomplish a great many things with these bullets, like attacking enemies, taking control of enemies, attacking machinery, and scanning the environment for hidden clues and items. Despair Girls was created because of a request by Spike CHUNSOFT that the Danganronpa series branch out into something that catered more to players of action games. Kodaka had long wanted to tell a story of two characters running away from despair, so the studio's request matched his vision of an action game that necessitated movement. Despair Girls was created to be an outlet that introduced the Danganronpa series to the action game crowd who wouldn't have initially been into the visual novel style gameplay of the first two games, but hopefully would give them a try after enjoying the spin-off. On the flip side, the developers worried that the shift would alienate their core players who are accustomed to visual novels and were not as skilled when it came to action games. They remedied this by adding the ability to switch between characters and by making Genocide Jack an easier character to play as. Danganronpa V3's existence was first teased in the announcement trailer for Despair Girls, which released at a Sony Computer Entertainment press conference all the way back in September of 2013. For Danganronpa V3, some staff members wanted to expand upon the previously told stories with a traditional sequel, while others wanted to deviate from them with something completely new. In the end, the team compromised by creating a sequel that didn't rely too heavily on the elements of the previous games. Kodaka said that Chapter 1 of V3 was the hardest chapter to write of any of the Danganronpa games. The tricks and twists were figured out from the get-go, but incorporating them into the plot proved to be immensely difficult. Kodaka wanted to create more compelling villains for the spin-off than had ever been done in the series, so he put as much time and effort into writing the game's baddies as he did the game's protagonists. The third game introduced some spicy new elements to the series, one of them being fabricated truth bullets, meaning that for the first time in the series, you're able to defeat your opponents using lies. The third game also introduced the SCRUM debate system, which divides the debate into two sides with different beliefs, making for more complex confrontations. To commemorate the release of the third game in Japan, Sony released a custom limited edition PlayStation 4 and PlayStation Vita consoles featuring designs prominently displaying Monokuma. Danganronpa showed no signs of slowing down with the release of V3, receiving a respectable 37 out of 40 from Famitsu. In its first week of release in Japan alone, the PlayStation Vita version sold over 76,000 copies, while the PS4 version sold about 40,000 units. By February of 2017, the Vita version had pushed over 115,000 copies. The V in Danganronpa V3 is short for the word victory. It was decided that the third game would be titled V3 to differentiate it from the second anime series, Danganronpa 3: The End of Hope's Peak High School. Danganronpa 3: The End of Hope's Peak High School was released in 2016. It takes place immediately after the second game, and it serves as a conclusion to the Hope's Peak Academy story arc from the first two games. They chose to make this third installment an anime and not a game because the developers thought it would be too painful for the survivors of Hope's Peak Academy to kill each other again. They also just thought that the story they wanted to tell lent itself better to anime. In October of 2016, the Seibert Danganronpa VR Gakyu Saiban was released for the PlayStation 4's PlayStation VR headset. In this VR demo, players partake in a class trial similar to those found in the Danganronpa games, in which players use truth bullets to counter arguments with their classmates. The reason Cyber Danganronpa VR was made to resemble Trigger Happy Havoc and not the third-person action-oriented Despair Girls was because all of the other companies developing VR were doing shooting games already, and the Danganronpa team wanted to do something unique. Producer Terasawa decided to set the punishment sequence from a first-person perspective in order to up the horror element, but added Monokuma to balance things out with a pinch of lightheartedness. In 2013, Spike Chunsoft, King of System, and the Good Smile Company joined together to create a Danganronpa cafe in order to promote the release of Danganronpa the animation. The cafe was in Akihabara, Japan at the Good Smile X Karaoke no Tetsujin Cafe, and it served themed food and drinks for 1 month. There was even a stage play in 2014 called Danganronpa the Stage, the Academy of Hope and the High School Student of Despair that followed the game's story and was about 3 hours in length. It featured Kanata Hongo as Makoto Naegi and Reo Kamato as Kyoko Kirigiri. A mobile app based on Danganronpa Another Episode, Ultra Despair Girls, was released exclusively for Android in August of 2015. The app serves as a file manager and prominently features Komaru, whose facial expression will change depending on how much storage is being used. And there you have it. Once again, I'm Jacob, and thanks for watching 107 Facts About Danganronpa. Which is your favorite game in the series? Who's the best character? Comment below and let us know. Don't forget to click the bell icon to become part of our notification squad, and if you like getting more from your games, subscribe to the Leaderboard, where we help you game smarter.